Hello, everyone. My name is Hasina Muhyiddin. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am delighted to welcome you to our first faculty FaceTime of the semester with Professors Joanne Golann and Kelly Slay. A few quick notes. We are recording this session and I have enabled the closed caption if anybody would like to use that option. Also, we know a lot of you might be joining us on your lunch hour, so please feel free to turn off your camera if you need. That's completely fine. And we're also doing something a little bit different this time because we will have Dr. Golann and Dr. Slay in conversation with one another, and then we'll open it up for the last 10, 15 minutes for any questions that other folks might have, but we'll be monitoring the chat throughout. So if you have comments or questions as the talk goes on, please feel free to put that in the chat as well. And it is my great pleasure to introduce our two speakers. Joanne Golann is an assistant professor of public policy and education in the Department of Leadership, Policy, and Organizations. Trained as a sociologist and an ethnographer, she seeks to understand how culture shapes educational policy and practice. She is committed to listening and learning from others and wants her students to develop a critical lens and sense of empathy when evaluating educational policies and programs. Dr. Golann's research focuses on how schools and families transmit cultural skills, behaviors, and habits to children. In her book, Scripting Moves, Culture and Control in a No Excuses Charter School, she draws from 18 months of fieldwork inside a high-performing school to examine how the school's rigid structures prepare students with the skills they need for college. Dr. Golann graduated got her PhD in sociology from Princeton and her master's degree in social sciences from the University of Chicago, and her bachelor's degree in English from Amherst College. She is also the recipient of the National Academy of Education and Spencer Grant Fellowships, dissertation fellowships. And now Dr. Kelly Slay is an assistant professor in higher education and public policy, also in the Department of Leadership, Policy, and Organizations. Her research examines issues of race, diversity, and equity in higher education and is primarily focused on three areas: the factors shaping Black students' college choice, completion, and career trajectories, the use and implications of enrollment management policies aimed at improving campus diversity, and racial and gender inequities in STEM in undergraduate and graduate education. Two of Dr. Slay's current projects explore the relationship between enrollment management practices in elite contexts and college choice decisions, and transition experiences of Black students from low-income backgrounds. And she recently launched a new study that examines how the disruptions caused by COVID-19 shape Black high school students' college-going processes and enrollment decisions. Dr. Slay was an inaugural presidential postdoctoral fellow at the University of Maryland and a postdoctoral associate at the Center for Diversity and Inclusion in Higher Education. She is passionate about helping her students pursue their educational and career goals, and received her PhD in higher education with a concentration in public policy from the Center of the Study of Higher Education from the University of Michigan. And we are so excited to have the both of you here with us today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Slay and Dr. Golann.
Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting us. It's a privilege and a pleasure to have an hour or so to engage with my colleague, Dr. Slay, and to engage with all of you. So we appreciate that.
Yes, thank you so much. So I don't know if we discussed who would start this conversation, but I guess I can kick it off, Joanne, if that's okay?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So, we have been on our walks and in our conversations talking about how we started our journeys into academia. And so I would be interested, and I think everyone else would be interested, if you could just share a little bit about your journey to where you are now. And I guess if this is something that you always envisioned for yourself.
Yeah, I would say I probably have a more typical journey in the sense of I just heard on the radio the other day a study that was done of professors on the tenure track, and they found that they're something like 50 times more likely to have a parent who had a PhD than your average population. And at the top tier universities, those tenure track professors that they surveyed, about 7,000 of them, 1/3 of them had a parent with a PhD. So I actually fall in that category. My father was an academic. He was a professor of oceanography. And we'll be talking about college choice because you do research on college choice. And I was thinking, actually, when I was making my college choices, I had actually thought in choosing a liberal arts college that this might be the kind of college that would, if I wanted to be a professor, this would be maybe a place to kind of develop that, a quiet place, a place to think. So it was actually on my mind quite early. I would say, through college, I didn't really think about it as much. And then by the time I got to my senior year, probably like a lot of college students, I was like, don't know what to do next. I was an English major in college. So I thought, what am I going to do with that? So I started to think about what is it that I like to do. And I really liked listening to people and listening to people's stories. So I had a visiting professor my freshman year who was an oral historian. And so I reached out to him and asked him a little bit about, oral history. And he mentioned the field of ethnomethodology, which is a subfield of sociology that focuses on conversation analysis, and put me in touch with the sociology professor at Amherst. I'd actually taken no sociology courses while I was there. So it was really only until after I left Amherst that I opened that conversation with that faculty member about sociology. He introduced me to ethnography. And I guess that's the story from there. I did a master's program where I did my first kind of ethnographic field work. I was studying day laborers. And then I worked for a couple of years at a research institute before going back to graduate school. At that point, I actually was not planning to be a professor. I wanted to keep working at that research institute, but things throw you in different directions. So here I am now. And I know for you, Kelly, you were a first generation college student, so I'm imagining your path looked a little different from there to here. So I'm sure, people would love to hear your story.
Yeah, our paths have been very different. So I will say that if you asked me 15 years ago if I saw myself doing what I do now, I would have laughed, honestly, at that. Although my mother reminds me that as a child, when I would play school, my sister and I would play school, that I would always demand to be the teacher. Although my sister is 5 years older than me. So she reminds me that I always in some way was destined to be where I am now. But I will say that there are a few reasons that why my career is unexpected and non-traditional. So one, Joanne, as you mentioned, I was a first generation college student. I knew that going to college was important. I knew it was something that I wanted to do. I was a really good student. And I knew that I would be successful, but I also recall not knowing more beyond what it took to be a lawyer or a doctor. So I knew you had to go to medical school or you had to go to law school, but I didn't have a good sense for what graduate education looked like beyond that. And actually, it wasn't until after I began the PhD that my mother realized that her half brother, who lived in another state, who was much older than her and whom I had never met, was actually a psychology professor. So I'm like, gosh, that really would have helped me a lot if I knew beforehand. So, that's one of the things. And then the second thing I would say is that throughout my bachelor's and my master's degree, I had a total of 3 Black professors, 2 men and 1 woman. And the woman professor, Stephanie Rowley, who is now the provost at Teachers College at Columbia, she was teaching an undergrad psych course. So if you know anything about, those undergrad psych courses, they are large. So there were over 300 students. I actually never met her. It wasn't until I went back to Michigan for my PhD that I met her and connected, I should say, for the first time. But then I will say that later as an undergrad, there was a seed that was planted for research when I became a research assistant for a psychology doctoral student who was working on her dissertation. And then years later, this is so funny, we realized that she's a professor at Georgia State, but we realized that she was actually one of my uncle's students when she was an undergrad. So, and then I would say that finally, the other kind of interesting thing is that I saw myself working in business. I had business internships all throughout college. I began working in sales and advertising positions. So I had a whole career in corporate America. And I envisioned that one day I would be an executive at one of the large car companies. You know, I'm from Detroit, and the automotive industry is a large part of our economy and our culture there. My grandfather worked in one of the Ford assembly plants, and I worked for Cadillac's marketing division at the GM World headquarters. So that was what I was thinking. But the funny thing about life, Joanne, as you mentioned, is that purpose pursues you. At least I believe purpose pursues you if you listen and if you allow it. So I was volunteering at a Head Start program at St. Paul Metropolitan Church in Detroit. And for those of you who are not familiar with Head Start, it is a federal program for students, pre-K students from low-income backgrounds. And there was something about being in the classroom with these little kids so full of promise that literally ignited something in me that I did not know existed. So within a year, I quit my really good job at a Fortune 500 company, much to the dismay of my colleagues and some of my family and friends, and took a huge risk. I took a 1-year policy fellowship at the Sargent Shriver National Center on Poverty Law in Chicago. I was supposed to stay for 1 year, but I ended up staying for 4. I got a master's degree. I worked with Gear Up in Chicago public schools and other education organizations at the K-12 and higher ed level. And ultimately, it was through those experiences that I decided to pursue a PhD and the career that I now have. But it was a windy road and one that I never would have expected to lead me to my current role.
It's great to hear. I knew bits of that, but I didn't know the whole story. And I like what you said about purpose pursues you. That's a good, good phrase to keep in mind. Given that you started, which I hadn't realized, with Head Start and Gear Up, kind of in the early ed K-12 world, how did you end up kind of moving your research interest towards higher education?
Yeah, so when I was in Chicago, I was working at Gear Up. So I was working with high school students and, in addition to some of the higher ed stuff that I was doing. And I was also working with, it was a new charter school in Chicago connected to the University of Chicago and partnered with the Consortium on Chicago School Research, CCSR. And so I honestly, I was just trying out different things. And I had started working with high school students in my policy fellowship as a part of my work. And so when that fellowship ended, I continued on because that was something that was interesting to me. And, in those experiences, what happened, and this kind of leads to the research that I now do, is that in both of these schools, so this, really good public school in Chicago and this charter school, both predominantly students of color, mostly Black students, but also some Latino students, I was helping them with, ACT prep and, college readiness and all of that. And I remember having a conversation with some of my students who are all really bright and who I am convinced could have gotten into just about any school that they wanted to, especially in the state, like U of I and UIC and DePaul. But they, expressed, the majority of them, I wouldn't say all, expressed that they were planning to attend one of the city colleges of Chicago. And in Chicago, that's the community college system. So I was really intrigued by that. And on the other hand, almost at the same time, the students that I was working with at the charter school, in that school, it was a very strong college going culture. You could walk down the halls and see the different flags and banners of, top colleges across the country. They had a college prep course. They would do campus visits as early as 9th and 10th grade. So it was very different. And in conversations that I had with some of those students, I recall one in particular where I asked a student, I was encouraging her to apply to Michigan because they had just went there on a campus visit. And she responded, no, I'm not going there. It's too white. And I was intrigued by that. And so I just became interested in wanting to know how these students were thinking about college, what were the factors that were affecting their plans, their high school culture, all of that. And I didn't have the language for what that was. I didn't even know that was an area that you could study, but that's where I started to develop an interest. And it wasn't until a little bit later, Michael McPherson, who at the time was the president of the Spencer Foundation, had just come out with a new book. And he was giving a talk at DePaul that was for students and not for students, for staff. And I was not supposed to be there because I wasn't a staff, but I literally snuck into this meeting, and like the president of the university was there. I was not supposed to be there, but he was talking about college choice and, students process through high school and the implications about where they go to college. And I went up to him afterwards and I asked him to be my mentor and asked if I could meet with him. I think he was kind of shocked, but he said yes. And over a series of meetings, he started to give me the academic language that helped me to understand what it was that I was interested in, the questions that I had. And he suggested, that I consider a PhD. And gave me names of places where faculty were actually studying the things that I wanted to study.
Wow, what a story. Yeah, I think, people often say, or students often wonder, how do you come up with a research question? And I think from a lot of people I've talked with, it is this, in some ways it's haphazard, something strikes you, something rubs you the wrong way, and you want to continue on with it. You want to think about it. And so that's interesting to hear that.
So how I'm interested in how you developed your interest and what led you to write the book. Actually, we'll get to the book in a minute. I want to hear about your research too.
Yeah, I can tie this together since a lot of my research has been working on this book for a long time. And yeah, for me,
and I should say, you all, the book is right there on my bookshelf.
Kelly's my biggest fan.
Yes, I am your biggest fan. It's a great book. But go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no. For me, it was sort of a personal experience. So I think learning, in sociology, learning theory and learning about this idea of cultural capital is a term used that thinking about how is inequality reproduced, right? So families pass down wealth to their children, or families pass down social connections to their children, or human capital. But there was this idea that I hadn't heard of, prior to graduate school, that they also pass down cultural norms and skills and values and habits that are differentially rewarded in different kinds of places. And that kind of struck a chord with me, being the daughter of immigrants. I just started noticing in graduate school different ways that my peers were interacting with faculty or speaking up in class that I felt gave them advantages in ways that I did not feel comfortable, or not familiar kind of interacting or speaking in that way. So it was sort of this concept, cultural capital, that stuck with me. And one thing that I was interested in was, well, can you actually teach this cultural capital? So Bourdieu argues this is learned, through the family, through the community. It takes a long time, it becomes habitual, these kinds of skills and behaviors and styles. But I kind of offhand, also, like, I didn't know much about these schools that I ended up studying. So it was also something, I don't even remember what, maybe I read about in the paper or heard about it on the news, but there were these schools like KIPP, and I must have seen some segment on them where they have this thing called SLANT, which is how they teach kids to show show attention in what you might say is like a middle class way. And it's an acronym that stands for sit up, lean forward, ask questions, nod for understanding, and track the speaker. And I said, wow, that's really explicit in teaching this kind of cultural code, for better or worse. And so that kind of intrigued me. And that was my entree into studying these schools. I, at that time, didn't know actually much about them beyond that. I would later learn as I immersed myself in the school that they were part, they had a key role in education policy and education reform, and supporters of school choice were pointing to these schools as places that were closing achievement gaps and kind of among the highest performing urban charter schools. So that drew me into kind of that conversation and different conversations around school discipline and choice. But it really started with this initial interest. Just something kind of tugging at me and interested.
I think it's so important that you listen to those tugs, so as students or wherever you are, if you're thinking about like the next topic or what it is that you want to study and focus on, I think those questions that compel you that you aren't able to answer, or the things that, your attention is directed towards. And in my experience, those have been the things that I think really are meant for me to focus on. So I love that you talked about those tugs in your own trajectory as well.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So I wanted to also hear more about, so this is kind of a selfish question because I'm working on a book at the very beginning stages. So can you just talk a little bit about when did you know that you wanted to write a book? Was that the plan when you were working on the research, and like, what has the process been like for you?
Yeah, I guess my memory must not be so good because, like, I forgot this, wanting to be a professor. I also forgot this, but a friend of mine from college, after the book was published, she told me, she said, oh, in college, on top of your bucket list was writing a book. I said, really? I don't remember that. But she said I had told her that. So I guess I had wanted to write a book for a while. And I think, because it was an ethnographic study, right? I think those naturally translate to sort of a book form. There's just, you can only put so much in an article. Articles have kind of one argument, and a lot of the richness, right, that comes out of your study just can't be contained, or in an article form. So I felt, that the book made sense for the study. And what was exciting about writing the book, I think, is diving into a lot of that context that you don't really put into an article. So I could start to, understand, school discipline or charter schools, or even writing about the history of how these schools were founded, things that, people just wouldn't want to see in an article. There would be no room for that. So it took a long time to write. I think about, the redrafting of every chapter. I probably wrote every chapter almost a dozen times. But I think it gave me a deep sense of kind of what I was studying in a way I wouldn't have gained if I hadn't done the work. So in that way, it's been very rewarding. And also, I think in the public aspect of it. So I find more than articles, books have more of a public audience, and in that way I've been able to engage, whether that's through editorials or interviews or giving podcasts or having the book reviewed or just getting emails from people who have, read it in a different way than I had with my other kinds of scholarship. So that's also been exciting to do. And it, a more public audience, they raise different kinds of questions and different things to think about. So that's also been, fruitful.
Yeah, it's been great to watch, and see the reviews and the podcasts and different ways in which you have been engaging with the public and with a broader audience. So I'm taking notes and learning from you.
I'll be here if you need some pointers.
Will do.
Well, I know, just looking at the clock, we had a couple things we told the audience we would cover, and one was qualitative research. So we're both qualitative researchers.
Mm-hmm.
There are a growing contingent of us in LPO, but we are in a mostly quantitative department. But I think we said we would talk a little bit about qualitative research, and maybe for folks here who are interested in qualitative research, maybe you could speak a little bit about what might be some good ways to get started with qualitative research, any tips, or anything along those lines if you want to kick it off.
Yeah, sure. So I'll say that I'll preface kind of some of my tips by saying that I was in a doctoral program that places a huge emphasis on both theory and rigorous quantitative methods. And while I believe that that particular training and quantitative methods are incredibly important, particularly in understanding the effects and implications of ed policies, I often wanted to know more beyond that. I wanted context. I wanted to know why there was an effect, why certain predictors were statistically significant and others weren't. What were their implications of different things? And so that is kind of what started to draw me to qualitative methodologies. I had a lot of questions that I felt needed to be answered with that particular approach. But since there weren't a lot of opportunities, formal opportunities initially in my program, I had to kind of put some things together because I really had a strong desire to learn these methodologies. I felt that they were a great fit for the work that I was doing on Black students, affirmative action policies, et cetera. So for me, it was, one of the things that I did is I created an independent study with a professor that focused on advanced qual methodologies. I kind of put together a lunch working seminar where folks who were doing qualitative research could workshop their papers. And I also took advantage of courses that were offered in other departments by professors who did qualitative research. So even if the course wasn't focused on qualitative researchers, it was an opportunity for me to interact and learn from faculty in other departments who use that approach. And then I would say that ARA has a lot of pre-conference professional development and training opportunities. There are a lot more qualitative institutes like week-long institutes and other things that students or other researchers can take advantage of. So I would suggest those as opportunities. And I think at a very basic kind of easy level, just reaching out to a professor and maybe asking, starting with a conversation. You might ask how you could, get involved in their research or, if they have any books or anything for you to learn. But I had to create and, cultivate those opportunities. And I think now we have more resources available and more professional development. Or I wouldn't say professional, but more training opportunities for qualitative methodologies. What would you suggest, or what has been your experience with supporting students who are aspiring qual researchers?
Yeah, one thing I would say is that it is easier to find your way into qualitative methods, perhaps, than quantitative methods. So, we even have colleagues who are, diving into it now who have done mostly quantitative methods. And I think it's as difficult to do it well. And it's a process you almost learn by doing it, by reading other people's qualitative work, especially ones that you think are high quality. There's less of a boilerplate, I teach my students, than there is for quantitative methods in terms of how you write up, you say, a qualitative article or book. But there are some things like, to become a quantitative researcher, you really probably need to take those 4 courses, of statistics. And for qualitative research, we know how to talk to people and observe. I mean, these are basic, human skills we have. So I think it's okay to kind of to just try a little bit. Like, I felt my formal training in qualitative methods was, one ethnography course, one qualitative methods course. It wasn't extensive. And I really learned a lot by doing it. So the advice I give students, if they want to do that work, is really to try to immerse themselves in the setting. So that's something distinctive, right, between the methods, that you need access to people, to places, and you need to understand them. So that's what I say. And another difference between qualitative and quantitative research, I think, is that a lot of qualitative research is more inductive. So your questions, you may come up with this great dissertation proposal with some question, and then you get into the field and you realize, oh, this is like the wrong question, or it's irrelevant. I mean, I kind of felt that way with my own dissertation. So I think having that head start, doing that, what you might call pilot work, getting into the field and just getting to know people and talking to them and seeing what is it that they care about and what's really going on in this place, is what I would recommend for students, interested in doing that, volunteering at a place or something like that. The other part of it, I think, is that you are working with people. So to what Hasina said in the beginning with that introduction, that I think came from, you sort of heard of my teaching philosophy, but teaching people to be empathetic to the people they study. I think you are interacting with people, real people whose stories they are sharing with you. And as I continue to learn, you really need to be sensitive to that and how you are representing people and telling those stories. So my book is a critical account of this school. And I thought the best compliment I got was a review that said I was mostly empathetic, so maybe not fully, but at least I got the mostly empathetic, or that people say my writing is nuanced, because that's what I'm trying, even though I'm telling a critical story, I'm trying to humanize people and try to see things from different lenses as well. And I think that's important. But as I said, I'm still learning. So I had the founder of the school, the person who basically let me into the school, read my book and was upset by it and kind of offended by the depiction of the school. And so that was really helpful for me. It was a kind of lesson learned. We engaged over email about it, and I tried to explain kind of the context of the book, that it wasn't a portrait of the school, but it was a particular lens into a particular question. And by virtue of that, it leaves out a lot, right, of what the school is doing that's positive. And so we came to kind of terms with that, but I think if I were to do it again, there'd be some things I wrote differently in the book. There would be some things I did differently about that research. So really keeping that at the fore when you're going into this kind of work, what are the kinds of questions the people you're working with care about? Can you do research in a way that is more of that kind of what we might call research practice partnership? Obviously, you want to be able to have your own lens, right? I still want to be able to bring a critical lens to my work, but also, just being sensitive. These are real people, real places, is something I'm learning.
Yeah, that's a great reminder for me, because the current project that I just started, which ironically is on Black students' college choice in COVID-19, and it's funded by the Spencer Foundation. Although Michael McPherson, who was my mentor, has long, resigned or retired from his position. So ironic, but we're recruiting, in high school. So the research is based in high schools, and we'll be talking to students, their caregivers, counselors, and principals. So your points are well taken around, how do you do that work? How do you enter these spaces and tell the stories? And as you said, ask and answer, the perspectives and the things that they really want, that are important to them as well.
Yeah, one of our colleagues actually spoke is here somewhere, Cesare Warren. I thought he does one interesting thing in his own book where he kind of tells the story, almost like quote unquote the facts, separate from his commentary, and then he gives his kind of analysis. I thought that was an interesting, method. So, someone's not going to argue with you about sort of the story you present, right? And then they can see, okay, here's what we saw, and then now here's my critical commentary on it, and you can agree or disagree with that. Typically we see that more interwoven together. But I thought, yeah, an interesting method.
So I don't know if we should pause for questions, or if we should tackle the last couple of things that.
So we can invite folks to share questions in the chat, but I think there were a couple of other additional little things that you guys wanted to chat about. So we can also, people feel free to turn on your cameras and join the conversation, or raise hands or put things in the chat. So we definitely want I think I have some questions, but I'm holding on to my questions too, because this has been a great conversation. I've learned so much. And so, yeah, I'd love for you to, if you have additional things that you wanted to bring up. But for our participants, yeah, please do feel free to jump in and ask questions or raise hands if you have questions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, some questions in advance, which we've tried to cover, but one we haven't covered is a question about self-care. Someone asked, what is your go-to for self-care? I don't know. Do you want to start that up?
As a new tenure track professor, I'm still learning about what self-care looks like. Honestly,
keep it real, Kelly.
Yeah, I'm still learning about what, every semester has its own rhythm. So I think we're constantly kind of learning and adjusting, but I'm still understanding. And I think actually I had a conversation with our colleague, Cesare Warren, who you just mentioned, about some of the things that he does. And he talks about setting the boundaries, clearer boundaries between work and, life after work. So when he checks emails and when he doesn't check emails, and, just trying to kind of create some space. Otherwise, as you know, in academia, there's no shortage of work and tasks and questions to answer. It kind of bleeds over. So that has been helpful. I will say that some of the things that I have done, some of the practices that I've implemented that have helped me just in general is being outside in nature. So hiking and taking walks and just being in the sun or seeing water and doing that on a regular basis has helped me. And then also journaling. I journal every morning when I get up. It's one of the first things that I do. And it's an opportunity for me to reflect, to, think through the things that I'm dealing with. Academia sometimes, there are moments where you feel imposter syndrome, where you're not sure if you can do, what needs to be done, or you might have doubts or insecurities. And so the journaling has been a way for me to very actively and consistently reflect on where I am and the messages that I allow to stay in my mind as I, navigate this journey.
Yeah, I would say my advice is very similar. So setting boundaries for me, I think, yeah, in faculty life and graduate student life, self-care has a lot to do with finding time where you're not working. So for me, that means keeping like a very consistent schedule. You know, I'm in the office at 8, I'm gone by 5, and I try. I'm not always successful, but to keep it to that, you know, try to put a hard stop, you know, at 9. I'm not going to do anything after that, you know. But I think I've told you, Kelly, that I really feel it's only maybe this year, last year, where I've been able to keep that, keep to that, you know, where now I don't work on weekends, really. I don't work in the evenings. But it was really hard for the first several years because you're preparing classes, you're just learning, you know, how to work with students. There's just so much going on that it was a lot of work. But there's a light at the end of the tunnel. So keep at it. And what you said about journaling, I do the same. I don't, I do it in the evening, and I do 3 things where I felt I was able to receive or give. I say love, you know, you could call it what you want, you know, and then 3 things where I felt I wasn't, or I didn't receive that. So that I find that helpful in a similar way to kind of reflect on my day and things I felt, that were kind of representing, you know, who I want to be and places where I can grow and learn from. So yeah, I think that's helpful. And I think also just having something to switch. So I have kids. So for me, it's just being able, that makes it easy because they are so demanding and they're also so
humans that
you just have to switch. You get home and you have to switch. But it's great for, like, I don't know, if you're anxious about something for work, right? Like just like when I see them, it just turns off, you know, and I can just switch over to something else. So for me, kids, it's obvious, but for other people it might be something else, you know, that you enjoy doing that helps you move to a different space.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Oh, I guess one more piece of advice. I think I've given this to you already, but for other people, something that's been very helpful for me that I learned through this, we're all members of this National Center for Faculty Diversity and Development, those of us at Vanderbilt. So if you haven't been at that website, they have a lot of great resources, and it's free to us because Vanderbilt is, you know, subscribes to that. So I've done a bunch of their, you know, their programs. But one thing that I learned from there that I continue to do is just, they call it a Sunday planning meeting. So on Sunday, I do just Sunday night, you kind of map out your week. So what are the goals you want to get done? And then you put your Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and I just map out every hour, what am I going to get done, you know, in those chunks of time. And then I just look at that, you know, throughout the week. And that's really helped me kind of keep to that schedule, keep to those boundaries, because it kind of delimits when are you going to do what. And I, you know, add a little flex time in there because things will always come up. So, you know, a couple empty hours here and there, but otherwise by Sunday night, I mostly got to know what my week is going to look like.
Yeah, that institute was really helpful, and that was also one of the key things that I took away from it. It's the Sunday evening meeting. So I think we might pause. If there aren't any questions, we could, of course, continue.
I see a question here. It says, I'm researching experiential learning in an undergraduate business program. My initial instrument is a survey, and I had planned to use structured interviews for the second method. Given the ethnographic nature of queries, should I consider collecting stories as the second instrument? I don't know if Mitchell wants to tell us a little bit more about the project.
Sure, I would be happy to. So the schools themselves are, as a strategic initiative, they're exploring deeper use of experiential learning in their program. And you know, a lot of it is how to, because it's very different from standard, you know, lecture driven pedagogical approaches in higher ed. And, as they're in the initial stages of this program, I wondered, if the research would be more helpful to faculty. And what you were talking about earlier about your experience writing your book really inspired me to ask this question as to whether stories would be more helpful to them than how particular faculty answered, more specific structured interview type questions. In other words, the point you had made is, context is really appropriate and important, and stories provide their own context. So the faculty could actually describe the way that they use experiential learning in a appropriate contextual way.
Yeah, I agree. I would think if you are studying a change in classroom practice, that you really would want to observe that practice and be able to describe what it's looking like across different classrooms, across different faculty. What are they doing? What are students doing in that classroom? To me, that would be kind of a valuable resource. I don't know who's the end target, but if it's this business program, for them to have, just to know, this is what's happening on the ground, and this is what what it seems to facilitate or not in the classroom. I think interviews are also great. I mean, what you can't get from ethnography is sort of the meaning making processes, right? So you won't be able to know how do students feel about it, or what challenges did faculty face in preparing, or do they feel, how does it compare to how they taught before? So, if possible, if you could do a mix would be great, or find some way, can you observe a class and then interview them after the class? Something like that, which would even be great. You could ask them questions about what you observed, during that class. So I think they offer different things, but I definitely think doing some classroom observations would enrich the study.
Well, that's really helpful, and I appreciate the feedback very much.
Sure.
I agree. I realized there was another question that asked about the factors contributing to Black students and or low income students' decision to select a certain college. And that is in line with my research, so I can talk a little bit about that. I would say that the factors that shape Black students' college choice are, one of them is access to college knowledge, either through, family, friends, teachers, counselors. So the social capital, I think that Joanne mentioned earlier on, is a really important factor. So you, depending on who you have in your network, you may not even know or be aware of certain, colleges and certain opportunities. So that certainly is a big factor, and just exposure, to post-secondary and higher ed. So family also plays a big factor for Black students, and also for Latino students as well, as they think about their college choice and options. And then perceptions around costs and affordability also bloom very large in the decision-making process. I would say for Black students, what my research has also shown is that their perceptions of campus racial climate and diversity are an important part of their decision. So more so than any other racial or ethnic group, Black students think about and weigh the commitment to diversity at the different institutions that they are considering. So in fact, I'm thinking back to my study, and some of my participants would recall going to different college campuses and would count, look around and count the number of Black students that they saw as a way to think about what it might be like for Black students at that particular institution. And that was one of the things that they considered. And then I would just say for students who are from lower income backgrounds, that, financial aid and affordability is also very, very critical for them as they think about colleges. In fact, some of the research says that these students will not even apply to certain institutions because of their perceptions. It doesn't matter if it's accurate or not, but their perceptions about costs can be strong enough to keep them from applying to and/or attending certain institutions. So that is a big part of this. And the one thing that I would note as we think about Black students and students from lower income backgrounds is that although we have them in a group, my research has just highlighted that there's so much complexity within these groups. There's so much complexity. You might think of students who identify as Black but are actually Jamaican American or Haitian American, or have other nationalities and identities that are important to them and factor into their college choice. Students from lower income backgrounds, sociologist Abraham Jack does a good job of clarifying the differences between students who might go to elite boarding schools or might have opportunities that students from other lower income backgrounds may not, and that can affect their college choice. So even though we might think of them as groups, there's still a lot of complexity and nuance that exists within those groups with respect to how they think about college, the decisions that they make in the process, etc.
Hasina, you're on mute.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay, sorry, I think I pushed mute, but like what to kind of help students and support students, what are some of the best practices to support them in their college choice? Because you had mentioned like there's obviously kind of an information gap, but are there other practices that colleges or counselors can provide to support students in their college choice decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things that you mentioned and that I alluded to is access to information. So we know in certain schools, the counselor to student ratio is really out of balance. And so even getting an opportunity to see a counselor to get the information that they need for the different parts of the application process can be a real challenge. So if there are resources and programs outside of the school that students can get involved in, programs that might be helpful in filling that gap. I would also say that for students and parents to, and this is especially with regard to financial aid, to go through the process of knowing what they actually are, what they can qualify for. So many students across both groups, again, do not consider certain institutions because in their mind, it is so expensive and they will never be able to afford it. But what they don't know is that in a number of places, they could apply and actually not end up having to pay, anything or very little, depending on their socioeconomic status and the information that they fill out. So to not be dissuaded early on about quote unquote elite institutions or colleges that might cost a lot. And then the other thing that I'll say, and this might seem to contradict what I just said about the costs and going to certain colleges, is to really think about where it would be a good place for you, what would be a good fit for you in terms of socially, in terms of your identity. So one of the critiques that I have now of Undermatch, so one of the critiques that I now have of the book that my mentor wrote about college choice is the idea that students should go to the most selective institution to which they are able. So the idea that they propose is that if you can go to a top university, go to the best university that you can go to, because the chances of, graduating are higher, and the, returns to, economic returns are better, just a lot of different outcomes. And the challenge that I have with that is that sometimes those places just are not a good fit for certain groups. There are a lot of structural issues. And so what I found in my research is that sometimes students go to some of these places and they're not inclusive, or there's a lot more work to do. And so they actually suffer in other ways, outside of just the academic part. So I think students need to think about not just the academics, but also what is a good fit for them in terms of their needs, where they will feel safe given their identities and their backgrounds, where they'll have the support to continue to move forward. So those are just some of the initial ideas that I have. There's of course more, but in the time that we have left.
Thank you for sharing that. Joanne, I don't know if you had anything else you would like to share that you think that would be helpful, as like some practices from the charter school that you want to highlight that that would be good for our participants to think about.
It's maybe too specific to there.
Okay,
So
sure.
It's with it, yeah, because there's not too much time left. In case anyone has a quick last question, I'll kind of leave it.
I just saw a question that came. It was, I think, sent to me directly by mistake, but it says, how do you both notice how your unique identities influence your research work and how your work is perceived by others? What challenges and joys come with that? Joanne, I know that's a big question, but is there any part of that that you want to respond to?
Well, I think with the book, what I had mentioned with the founder of the school was a Black man, and I was critiquing some ways in which the school's practices were racialized, and I think that was what was most hurtful. And the comment he gave, I thought, was very helpful. He said, if you were to go to a school run by Jehovah's Witnesses, and they let you in to study it for 18 months, and you were writing about their practices, what kind of sensitivity would you give, right, in writing that? So I think recognizing when you come, as I did, from the outside to this community, that you do need to be sensitive to the people and the work and the culture there. So for me, that's something, right, when I'm studying outside of my own community, something that I think is important to think about, both in doing the research and in writing about that. So that would be a challenge, I guess. Anything you want to add, Kelly?
I feel like not that I can adequately articulate in the minute left, but I would just say that, who I am, my background, my journey in many ways, shapes, the things that I'm interested in. I'm very passionate about empowering students and helping them to pursue their goals and their interests, and also in centering the voices of groups that are often pushed to the margins. And I think that part of that commitment and that desire comes from, my own experience as a woman of color, and as a first generation college student. So very much committed to centering those voices. And that's part of the reason why I'm drawn to qualitative research methods. And the other thing is that I so much enjoy learning the stories, the narratives, the experiences. I love the messiness sometimes and the twists and turns of qualitative research and just discovery. And so because I think it mirrors my own, journey that I share with you all, the twists and the turns. So I just love hearing people talk about how where they are and how they got there, and just the nuance and the complexities that we don't always see.
Well, thank you both for sharing your time and your journeys with us. I mean, from, pursue your purpose to mentoring to qualitative research. I think it's been such a rich talk, and really am grateful to the both of you for being here with us today. And for all of our participants for joining us. We are at time, so thank you all. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and weekend. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.